Composition is the most basic photographic skill, and yet it is often one of the most challenging to master. In this video, we'll look at some of the ways I go about composing my Nightscape images and how that impacts on the final result, especially when combined with other lighting and editing methods. You see, we have to start thinking about composition well before we even get out there to shoot at night. Now, I know you're probably sick of me banging on about this, but it's vital that if at all possible, we get out to our intended shooting location during daylight hours to scope it out. So my number one tip is to spend time working out the angles and the view while you can clearly see the big picture of the scene in daylight. Believe me, it's a lot easier to do this now than later when it's pitch black out there. What I'll often do is open the PhotoPill's augmented reality view on my phone. This enables an overlay on the phone screen of where the Milky Way will appear in the scene. This is really handy for establishing how our intended foreground subjects may fit into our scene. As well as that, we can clearly see what time of night this composition will be happening. Now, that is a win-win situation. So once we've established the direction we need to shoot, we then turn our attention to what foreground elements we want to include in the shot. Now, you may think this to be quite obvious, but believe me, it isn't. In most landscapes, there's quite a lot going on, and I think it's important that we take the time to survey all of the individual parts of the scene. If we have close foreground subjects that we want to emphasize, then it's important to get that camera down low to make that object stand out from whatever is behind it. A general photographic principle is that when we place the camera low down in the scene, we place a greater emphasis on the foreground elements. They appear larger, especially when shooting with a wide-angle lens, than the more distant elements in the scene. Now, quite often, my main reason for shooting a particular scene will revolve around those foreground subjects. You may have seen me scouring the countryside looking for all sorts of old car wrecks or abandoned buildings. Now, things like that really stand out when you get the camera down low to their level. Now, this is something I learned a long time ago when shooting weddings and portraits. Get down low and the subjects really start to pop. Another great part of shooting from a low angle is that our distant horizon line gets lower into our composition. Now, why is that a good thing? Well, by lowering the horizon, it becomes so much easier to get our foreground above that horizon line. And by doing that, it immediately stands out and looks fantastic against the night sky background. You see, it's simply a matter of maximizing the various compositional elements to look their very best. The night sky is amazing and magnificent, but to be honest, I reckon the key to an amazing astro landscape photo is what we do in relation to the foreground. The sky is huge. Well, we'll have no problem capturing that, but the foreground, well, that's another matter indeed. Another thing that's really important at this stage is to take note of what is in the medium foreground. And what I mean by that would be things like trees behind our main subject, or even more disturbing, telegraph poles or power lines. Now, these things can be a nightmare to edit out in post-production. So now's the time to notice where they may interfere with our intended composition. So a question I always ask myself before hitting that shutter button is, what is in the background? Another aspect of this is to try to keep clean lines around our foreground subjects. If there are overhanging trees, for example, then we need to see how we can best separate the branches from each other. Don't let the tree sit directly behind a point of interest because it will inevitably distract us from the main subject. And let me tell you, you will notice it when you get that image on a computer, or even more so if you print your work. Okay, so another aspect of this discussion that I'd like to mention is that I always like to create multiple points of interest in my nightscapes. Now, to be honest, whenever we shoot the Milky Way galactic core, it becomes an obvious point of interest, but sometimes we just leave it there and neglect other obvious foreground features that with a little bit of thought can stand out and really lead our eyes throughout the image. Things that I mentioned before, like cars or old buildings, rocky outcrops or mountains, all of these things will give more power to our compositions. Make use of leading lines in our images. Natural elements that help with this can be roads or maybe fence lines, rivers and creeks, gullies and tree lines, perhaps a beach or an ocean view winding through towards the Milky Way. All of these things can work in our favour. Now, this leads me to another thing that goes hand in hand with this concept of having multiple points of view in our nightscape images. You've probably heard about the rule of thirds. This is where we divide the scene into two horizontal and two vertical intersecting grid lines. Now, where those lines intersect will be approximately a third of the way into the field of view from any angle. And the theory is that by placing our most important elements onto those intersecting lines, we'll end up with a much more powerful and pleasing image. In my experience, this is true for the majority of our shooting. The thing about this is that by adopting this approach, we're effectively creating what might be described as dead space in the other non-intersecting parts of the image. And that's a good thing. What we're doing here is giving breathing space to the shot. Now, I bet you weren't thinking about breathing space before you clicked on this video today, were you? But there you go. So this space makes it easier for our eyes to wander through the image from one point of interest to another, perhaps along a predetermined path or leading line which we have incorporated already into the scene. You know, there have been a lot of very smart photographers who worked this stuff out many years ago, and it really does make it easier for us because they did all the hard work, and all we need to do is look at the scene before us and imagine the masterpiece that's just waiting to be shot. Okay, so maybe it's not always that easy, but you get my drift. One of the other things that can help establish a great shot is to simply add water. No, I am not joking. Look for reflections, and I'm sure that you're already immediately thinking about a lake or a harbour or some large water body. Well, yes, if that suits your image, but to be honest, I'm thinking about much smaller images. Look for puddles of water, rock pools, or perhaps a water fountain, or even a bird bath. You'll be really surprised how these small water sources can greatly enhance a Milky Way photograph. But be prepared to get that camera right down close to the ground. Your knees and your back will complain about it, but your resulting image will be well worth the pain. Now, I often talk about utilizing lens focal length. And this is also something that impacts on our compositions. Wide-angle lenses will render a scene a whole lot differently to a longer focal length. So remember the series of images I showed a little while ago of the tree shot with 4 different lenses. It's pretty obvious that these vary considerably, even though the method and lighting were identical for all of them. Ultra-wide lenses add wide-angle distortion. And while this can be actually annoying at times, it also gives us another tool to use in our quest for a killer shot. That bend or distortion of the frame from top to bottom or left to right gives us a unique perspective that just isn't possible with longer focal lengths. I guess it's up to us to work out how to utilize it to our advantage. So once again, getting low down to the ground and angling the camera up will enhance this effect even more. Now, another really important compositional technique is to make use of angles, especially when shooting buildings or old cars, trucks, towers, windmills, or, to be honest, anything that has a form and symmetrical shape. I always strive to shoot buildings to show the edges of the brick or stonework, or perhaps timber weatherboards on a building. So what that means is that if at all possible, I'll shoot the subject from a 3/4 angle. So what on earth does that actually mean? Well, a picture tells 1,000 words, as they say. You can see from all of these images that I've lined up the foreground subject so that it's pointing at an angle either towards or away from the camera. This gives perspective and direction that somehow mimics a three-dimensional real-world point of view. Now, this is an important point. In effect, what we're trying to do with photography is capture a living, breathing, three-dimensional world onto a flat, two-dimensional camera sensor. So our imagination and compositional creativity needs to kick in and help our viewers see the magic that we can actually see in real life. And believe me, creating angles will really help with that. Now, we're almost done with this video, but I can't finish without establishing a relationship between how we light an image and how we compose an image. So my Nightscape photography journey has very much gone hand in hand with how I light my foregrounds. But even more than that, my Nightscape photography really is all about my foregrounds. That's always my focus. Now, of course, I love the night sky. I mean, that goes without saying, but it's that connection between the night sky and the landscape elements that means so much to me. That's what really engages me. So the lighting of my foreground subject matter has been an evolving journey, and I guess that's going to continue for many years to come yet. I know that many of you are landscape photographers and you completely understand the special relationship that early morning light has on the landscape during our sunset, and it's the same at sunrise. But what is it really that we love so much about that time of day? It's quite simple really, and it centers around two things: the angle of light and the color of light. The angle of the rising sun is low on the landscape, and that gives us a wonderful, I guess, an edge glow on one side and a shadow fall off on the other. It gives shape to the scene. It gives character. Now, you all know it's impossible to get that angle and direction of light at midday. And it's the same with those gorgeous colors that we see lighting up the sky when the sun's low down on the horizon. So when I go out to shoot a nightscape image, I'm always thinking about direction and color of my light sources. This directly influences my composition. Without any lighting direction, my scene becomes flat and, dare I say it, boring. Now, okay, before you start having a go at me, please listen. I'm not just talking about artificial light painting. There are light sources everywhere. There's moonlight, zodiacal light, light pollution, passing traffic, even city lights. But we have absolutely no control over any of those light sources. Now, maybe not, but we do have control over where we place the camera and where we point that camera. So if we have some light pollution on the horizon, then it often works to place a foreground point of interest in front of that spot. It'll give a lovely silhouette and instantly draw our attention to that very location. It's the same with moonlight. Now, if the amount of moonlight isn't too great, it becomes a really valuable asset when shooting, say, a large mountain range or something that we couldn't possibly light ourselves. If we decide to do our own light painting, then of course, we're totally in charge of what is illuminated. This is the ultimate creative control. And when we couple that with some of the ideas that I've already mentioned, we can have an amazing composition. We have the ability to hide what we don't want to see and highlight the most important elements. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed our little discussion about composition. I'll be revisiting this topic a lot more because there are so many aspects to this, and I'll be really pleased to get your opinions on this important subject. So as always, I welcome your ideas in the comments section below. And if you like this type of content, then I'd love you to give us a thumbs up and a like, and I'd be delighted to have you on board as a subscriber on the channel. So until the next video, I hope you all have a wonderful week, and I'll see you soon.